Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 128 for Monday, February 15th, 2021. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me as always is my friend Jonny, but the internet, that's you, knows him better as Pixelriffs. Hello, sir.
2 stacks. I just realized we're at 2 stacks of episodes, 128. How do
nice.
we know?
Yeah.
We haven't even acknowledged this. That seems like something I should have brought up in the pre-show, because normally we're on top of numbers and stuff like that. But I guess we've just been we've been going through it, and we have such a big show for everybody this week that we didn't even acknowledge it. But speaking of the pre-show, you can get that from patreon.com/thespawnchunks if you're interested in listening to the pre-show and the post-show chats that Joel and I have around each episode. We call it the render distance. Once again, patreon.com/thespawnchunks. This week we talked a little bit about our eating habits around this time of year, pancakes, fish, and everything in between. And we've also talked a little bit about some of the stuff that we're going to get into later regarding this week's Snapshot and how well it runs on both of our PCs. So once again, if you want to hear the render distance, the extended conversation at the start and end of the podcast, patreon.com/thespawnchunks. One more brief programming note before we get into what we've been doing in Minecraft this week. Normally this week would be a chunk mail dispenser where we go through a bunch of email from people, and we've had a lot of email recently, especially with a couple of the discussion topics we've been tackling, so thank you for all your email. However, this week's Snapshot has been such a big change in the landscape, quite literally, and yes, I'm going to use that joke again, that we thought we would probably dedicate the entirety of this show to that, and talk about the news and what all has been going on, and then next week, as long as there isn't another monolithic Snapshot, we're probably going to get into chunk mail then. So if you're excited to have your email read on the show, stay excited and tune into next week's episode where we will probably be doing a chunk mail dispenser.
So what have you been up to this week in Minecraft, sir?
This week I've had quite an interesting experience because I'm teaching somebody else to play Minecraft, and not in the format that I normally do by making videos and just having a more sort of passive interaction with the audience. Instead, I have been streaming with my brother-in-law, who goes by Mr. Casto on Twitch, and he and I have been playing Minecraft on a server that I've set up for the purposes of teaching him the game, because he last played in alpha when Minecraft was very new, probably had about 20 blocks or so to work with. Yeah, so I joke that technically he's been playing Minecraft longer than I have, but there's just been a bigger gap in between play sessions for him. So so I was kind of teaching him a little bit more about the way, Minecraft as it exists now is played, and it was really fun. He's taken to it very well. He's already a video gamer, so he does a lot of gaming content, and he's gonna pick stuff up a little bit faster than somebody who is just coming into Minecraft not really having played much other stuff. So I tell him something and he retains the information. I don't have to keep reminding him that he goes to a crafting table to get a 3x3 grid and so forth. So it's been a relatively easy experience that way. Had a really fun time jump scaring him with an Enderman, which I will try and find a clip for as long as I can guarantee that there's not bad language, because he jumps pretty bad. At one point, I think he looked at an Enderman in a ravine, and I said, okay, let's retreat back to our house, and hopefully it won't follow us. And there was a section of our house that was 3 blocks tall, but he was standing in the 2-block tall part, crafting something up. And then he was like, what was that noise? And I went, turn around, and there was just an Enderman, full frame in his... Yeah, and I think I ended up having to kill it for him, because he was just, a little bit shaken by it. But it was great stuff. It's been really fun, and... we're potentially going to be doing that more regularly. We might have another stream this week where we get back into it. We've just started, getting into stone and iron tools, and I think we found a ruined nether portal that we were in the process of exploring when his internet connection unfortunately took a nosedive and we had to postpone the stream. But that's been really fun, and I don't really play multiplayer Minecraft a lot, and especially not in the context of also having to make sure the other person is guided through the experience. But it's been a fun time.
Out of curiosity, and this is nothing to say that your brother is like this, but do you find that when you do that with someone that is new, do you find it's a little bit hard to get focused? There's just so much to look at. You kind of forget, when you're a seasoned Minecraft player and you're going, okay, I'm going to grab some wood and then I'm going to go look for a place to set up. And you kind of ignore the fact that there's grass blocks and stone blocks and coal blocks and what's that tree? And can I get the leaves? There's all these questions that new people have, I find. And it's like herding cats sometimes to bring new people in.
There is a lot of stuff to think about, but I think the early game progression is always going to be the same. So I think once we get a little bit more developed, it might be a little bit like, okay, we're spoiled for choice now. We can go anywhere, do anything. But I think while we're still in the process of, okay, we need to get tools and food so we can at least survive, that kind of like first, second day way of playing Minecraft is more or less always going to be the same. And we did the usual thing of like just digging into a hillside and putting a door on it and saying, okay, this is our house for the foreseeable future. We didn't get into like, okay, we're going to build a castle kind of plans. So,
no, of course, yeah.
Yeah, maybe in future it'll expand to something a bit more ambitious.
That's an old tip. That's when I was first learning to play Minecraft. I was watching, oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name now.
Like Paul Soares Jr. or somebody?
Yeah, it was Paul Soares Jr. Thank you. Survive and Thrive in Minecraft. And that's what he did. He would basically just walk around and look for a place where there was maybe some exposed coal. And then in the process of digging out that coal, he would also dig like a little like 9x9 or 6x6, hole in the wall. Starting with a 1 wide door and then just put a door on it. It's like this is just going to be home base. It's just the easiest way to get 4 walls around you that you can control. I've also done the other thing, which is to if you're out in the plains biome and you just really want to set up kind of like right where you are, I'll dig a 2 deep ditch around a square just to give myself a moat, essentially. You can still get shot by skeletons depending on how big your area is, but if you've got a bunch of torches on the ground and a moat, at least zombies and really at that stage of the game, what kills me are the baby zombies and chicken jockeys. Like that's where I just like first person melee. I'm just like, nope, not good at this, and I end up dying to that kind of stuff. So I find that kind of thing is better. Although now but when last time I did that, there weren't phantoms in the game. So it's a different ball game being out in the open like that now.
Yes. We have not got as far as phantoms yet. The other thing about Chris is that he's a pretty severe arachnophobe. And so and he's played horror games on his channel where he's like not been able to look at the screen because there have been some spider looking enemies, right? And there's in particular, I think he played the sequel to The Evil Within, and the final boss basically just births spiders from it at one point, and they start running around and chasing you. And like he wears a heart rate monitor for games like that, and it's going up into like the 180s, and you're like, wow, okay, this man is about to die on stream. But then,
oh my gosh,
we talked about it beforehand because I knew this about him, and I was trying to be like relatively compassionate about it, and was like, okay, so there are spiders in this game. They are, of course, very cartoony and blocky. But I obviously wanted to make sure it was okay with him. I could set up a mod or some command blocks that would remove spiders from the game. And he said, last time I played, I don't remember liking them, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't like, okay, I don't want to play this anymore. So yeah, and he has taken the approach of just like killing any spider he sees with like a vengeance. So I think he's probably going to be okay. We haven't got as far as cave spiders and abandoned mine shafts yet, which might change his mind. But yeah, I think for now, like the surface level spiders, he is largely okay with, which is good. I think they also don't move as creepily as actual spiders do. The sort of articulation of the legs is probably a big part of it, and just like the thing that creeps people out about spiders. So I said, yeah, there are spiders, they might jump at you to attack, and he said, okay, I think we'll be all right. And so far he's been a trooper, so props to him.
I'm not super jumpy in games, but you should let him know not to play Satisfactory, because the bugs in that, and they're not like spiders, they're spider-like. They're designed to be spider-like, but they're like 6 legs, maybe 4 legs, depending. But they are fast.
Yeah.
And they have that articulation thing that like even, I mean, the streams are long down now, but like when I was playing last winter, like there were some audible moments for me just going like like just get away from me. Like I don't know what it is about all fantasy games everywhere. They probably have Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit to thank for it, but like every single game that I've played, the first boss / first enemy thing that you have to encounter in the world is usually a spider the size of a cow. And you're just like, why is it always spiders?
It's like either that or slimes, right? It's like the basic enemy is either, something that we don't have a great deal of affection for in the real world, or just something fantasy enough but still squishy enough that you can just wail on it for a while.
Yeah. Oh man. So with Chris, are you backseating, not in the Twitch way, but in the letting him make all the decisions, just kind of like helping him when he gets stuck, or are you like front and center guiding and him following along?
It's a guide sort of thing for now. I think simply because the early game doesn't really teach you a great deal about it. Like a lot of it would go a lot slower, and I feel like with a stream audience there, he would probably be just getting tips from the chat and stuff anyway.
Right.
I think later on, like I said, once we get a bit better geared up, I have sort of put him out in the open and said, like, okay, it's daytime, like we've got a little bit of equipment, we've got like stone pickaxes and swords, we've got a little bit of iron armor now, we have shields, what do you want to do? And he's kind of gone, I don't really know yet. And I've gone, fine, okay, like let's go and look at that spruce biome over there, you know, let's go and gather a little bit more wood and find the stuff that's more unique to each biome, which kind of ties into the stuff I've been doing in Survival Guide lately as well, kind of making these biome dioramas and saying, like, what is unique resources for each biome. You get vines from a swamp or a jungle, you get berry bushes from a taiga, you get foxes there as well. You know, there's I kind of, like, I have a little bit of this stuff at the forefront of my mind, so if I want to show him an overview of what's possible, and then he can basically just point and go, that one, and we'll go, okay, and we'll focus on that for a while, then maybe that'll work out. But it remains to be seen if it's something he's going to keep up with, or if he just prefers playing more variety games that he's already been doing. But yeah, that's where we're at right now, and looking forward to doing a little bit more. How about you? How's I assume the medieval town progresses well?
It does, actually. I believe the last time we were talking about some of the landscaping that I was doing in what's now, I'm calling it West Hill because it's the west part of the town and there's a hill.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that I'm sort of organically naming neighborhoods. And so the first part of my weekend was spent finishing off the rest of that hillside into the river and kind of making sure that the river access worked out the way that I wanted to. And then I got into roads, and as soon as I kind of realized that there was a large flat place, this is like where I thought, okay, well, I've got a market area, kind of like a food vendor area planned for other places in the town. This is going to be more like a merchant place, like things where you would buy clothing or weapons or like that kind of stuff, more expensive goods, that kind of idea. And so I quickly got into figuring out where the road access was going to happen. I had kind of ballparked an idea for a west gate. But I needed to I wanted to refine that, because the way that I'm approaching this, and this is a tip that I picked up from Whip a long time ago, is he's always thinking about what your player view experience is when you come around a corner or when you go through a gate or when you like do certain things.
Yeah.
And framing different parts of your builds with your entrances. So like, yes, you've got this nice keep in the middle of the thing, but how often do you frame that keep or reveal that keep from going around a corner to make the player go, wow, because they're walking around on foot, you know? And so that's what I had to do. I had to adjust my my gate positioning and stuff like that. But the merchant square and the road ended up being an octagon for the square. And it worked out just, there's a bunch of little happy accidents. And this is one of my favorite things about Minecraft, where if you're not clear cutting and flattening an entire area, you're trying to interpret the landscape and build upon that. And I've got this moat that goes around the keep, and I was going to run it right down next to the keep and into the river. But because of the way that the hillside was working, there's a steep part. And then I had this octagonal village square that I wanted to put in. I thought, wouldn't it be cool if the moat actually went down into like a canal, and the canal went under the square and out the other side into the river, creating a bit of a like a culvert or a sewer.
Nice.
Yeah, and then I thought, well, I could then put a bridge over that, because I thought it'd be really cool to have some water here in the town that I have to bridge over. That's not just the river, like, so not big bridges that are like, 6 or 8 blocks long, just little foot bridges and stuff. And so I've got this plan to have the moat go underneath the square. The moat has a waterfall from the moat down into the canal. So I'm looking forward to how this is all going to come together in the end. And I'm feeling better about this side of town, even though I haven't drawn out all the roads or planned out any buildings. I'm just I have that, not satisfaction feeling. I have that safe feeling of like, okay, I've planned the road. I have the entrance. I have my limits. I have my bookends. Now I just have to be creative and figure out how much I can fit in here.
Yeah.
And I find that for me as a builder, I need to know where I am before I can figure out what I'm going to build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's where I am with that.
Yeah, I think it's nice to have that feeling of knowing what you're going to do next when you're embarking on a project like this. It's like, okay, I'm logging out now, but when I come back, I'm going to be able to do this, this, and this. You sort of have a shopping list, basically, of things that you need to, a checklist of stuff to tick off. Whereas I think sometimes when you get stuck into a project like this, if you don't know what's coming up next, it's too easy to log in and then spend about 2 hours not really doing very much. So I think planning out, this could be a good strategy for anybody who's working on a project like this in future, is before you log out, plan the next step of the town, even if it's just like marking out where a road is going to go or something like that. Like, so give yourself something to do the next time you log in, and I feel like that experience is going to go a lot better for you.
Yeah, 100%. And I remember logging in Friday, having no idea what I was going to do next, but knowing that I hadn't finished the landscaping. So just like, well, the landscaping thing is just like, it has to happen sooner or later. A chill Friday night stream, pushing grass around sounds like a fine, way to spend the evening. So it does allow a little bit more chat time on stream because you're not quite as involved with a build, and I'm glad I did it, because going into the weekend, I started with a lot more thoughtful block placing, like really trying to hone things in. And I found that was helpful in terms of like what I was going to do next. And for me, I'm not sure how you do roads, but like I tend to just run them. Like I walk where I think I want them to go, and I'm just kind of like randomly throwing down a cobblestone block like every 6 blocks.
Yeah.
And then I use this map mod that I have just for aesthetics and ease of content creation. To then look down at it from the top down and say like, that's pretty straight. Like I should maybe get a curve to that, or, where does that really want to enter the woods and exit the town and all this kind of stuff. And then I can refine that curve a little bit. And then when I come back the next stream, I say, okay, now it's time to really figure out where is the road. Like I need the right and the left side of the road. I need to know how wide it is. I need to know where it curves. And I'll spend longer than I should maybe honing that road. But in the end, it gives me some really clear boundaries to work within. And one of the things that I noticed was in the other gates that I've built in the town, they're all cardinal directions. So north, south, and east, and they're all square. They all face those directions, and this one, the way that the landscape was, as I'm trying to utilize the landscape, there is no west, because west is a mountain. It's one of the reasons I chose this location for the town. And so the west gate is just located west, but it actually faces southwest. And as a result, I had to build an angled gate, which I've never done. Still a process. It's only about half finished. And even then, there's still a lot of details that need to be filled in. But had a lot of fun the other day putting this together, where I had to do the wireframe. Now, thankfully, it came together really quickly because I already have 3 other gates in the city or in the town to pull from. And I'm trying to get these to go in a way that are oldest to newest. And this is kind of like the second newest. So I had an opportunity to make it more fancy, have a little bit more advanced architecture and stuff involved. It's not just like a stone box with a hole in it, like it's actually got like a covered battlement, and it's got a tower with some multiple peaks and some fancy stuff on the top. So it looks a little bit nicer in that way. And I also, because it's going into the fancy rich part of town, I also wanted to make it look like it had more money involved. Like the people that were there were maybe had more building materials and were able to put more into it. And again, really having a good time, both with angled build, and it's not like a true angled build. The towers are still square in terms of Minecraft placement. They're right angles. But then the gate part itself runs at, I think it's a 20-degree angle when you do two over, one up. But it was a lot of fun. It came together a lot faster than I thought it was going to. And I got to use the new wall connection for the stone brick walls.
Yeah.
And how they are nice and smooth and there's no gaps in them. And man, what a nice way to add some depth, make things look fancy.
Yeah, definitely. And it's come together really well. I think the hardest part of doing angled stuff like this is when you have to also then insert a rounded shape like an archway into it. Mm-hmm. That's the stuff that always messes me up. And I really think it's because I don't build on a big enough scale for some of the stuff that I try and do. And so I end up trying to make an arch that's only like 5 blocks wide in an angled wall as well. And it just looks like far too blocky for the scale. And I think what you've got here is a really nice balance of scale and working with the angle that you've got already, and it sort of fits into that wall very nicely. Not to mention, I like the detail you've got with the stairs kind of overlapping into the next row of blocks over in the roof line in the shot where you've got shaders in there. That looks really nice. I think that comes together very well as an adjoining effect.
Thanks, man. Yeah, the layers, and I mean, obviously, I pick up a lot of stuff from watching, players like you and Whip and Mythical Sausage, and I'm kind of like borrowing all these techniques from people. But it took me a while to sort out the archway, and basically, it's just a matter of taking the archways that I've built before that I like and translating them into a direct kind of like hole through the gate, and the hole is straight, even though the gate is on an angle, and that I think was the trick. I tried to make the hole be completely perpendicular and go through at an angle, like and it really didn't work out very well because of how small it is, because it's only 6 blocks wide. This was the other challenge, is that normally I do, like you said, 5 blocks, 7 blocks, 9 blocks. Like usually people want odd numbers with a single block center, and the way that this particular angle is put together on the gate, you're always going to have an even number of blocks. So my center gate was either 4 or 6 or 8, and 8 felt too big, and so I went with 6. And I think that might have helped a little bit. But there are some angles, depending on, it's only for a second, but when you're walking underneath it, there's a couple of points where the stair blocks kind of look funny, not on the side that you're going through, but the side that you're emerging from. It looks a little bit weird sometimes when you see the silhouette, but there's nothing you can really do about it unless you wanted to make a square hole,
Yeah.
Moving on into the news this week. Boy, howdy, do we have something for you folks.
Oh, yes.
Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 21W06A. This week's snapshot introduces a major change to how caves are generated within Minecraft. You could say that we're now introducing the cave part of caves and cliffs. This is only the first step in our underground adventure, so please note that snapshots show features in early development and that there are 2 notable caveats to this snapshot. You'll be unable to open old worlds in this snapshot, as there is currently no upgrade path towards New World height. All caves, the new type between Y31 and Y63, will be flooded with water. That is from the Minecraft.net post we'll have linked in our show notes. The new features added in 21W06A added noise caves and aquifers. Noise caves and aquifers include things like a new way of generating caves providing more neutral variety. They can get really huge sometimes. Noise caves come in 2 flavors. Cheese caves. I see what they did there. Like the holes in Swiss cheese, these often form caverns of various sizes. And spaghetti caves, long, squiggly tunnels, sometimes wide, like Tangeletti. I'm not sure how they...
Tagliatelle, I think.
Tagliatelle? Yeah, I'm not Italian, if you can't tell. The noise part of noise caves is a technical term and has nothing to do with sound. The old cave caverns and canyons still generate, combining with noise caves to form interesting cave systems. As with carvers, when noise caves intersect the surface, they form cave entrances. An aquifer is an area with local water level independent of sea level. Aquifers used during world generation to generate bodies of water inside noise caves. This sometimes results in a large underground lake. For now, aquifers are only used below Y31. This means all noise caves between Y31 and sea level will be flooded with water, and noise cave entrances will essentially be lakes. This will be fixed later. Magma sometimes generates at the bottom of underground bodies of water. Underwater cave carvers and underwater canyons have been removed since aquifers are used to generate water in caves instead.
This snapshot also, as it hints at in the opening spiel, introduces generation range and build limit expansions, which have been expanded up to 64 blocks up and 64 blocks down to a total range of 384 blocks, which previously was 256. Underground features, structures, and caves now generate all the way down to Y-64. There are mineshaft changes as well. Mineshaft pieces do not generate if they would be fully floating in the air, and mineshaft corridors are now supported by oak log pillars when needed. They've also removed any kind of floating cobwebs that would just be hanging in midair in a cave. They've also fixed a couple of bugs from previous snapshots, including big drip leaf being able to be broken with arrows in an area that should have been covered by server spawn protection, and small drip leaf being able to grow to destroy any block, which was the bedrock breaking glitch we talked about in a previous episode. Before we move on and talk about some of this, which is going to be the main discussion for the show, I do want to bring up the Minecraft Dungeons Flames of the Nether DLC announcement. There is a Minecraft.net blog post and also a YouTube video, the Minecraft Dungeons Dev Diaries Flames of the Nether DLC, which I really recommend watching, as it's going to give you a really good overview of some of the stuff coming in the update. But I'll give you the verbal overview. Flames of the Nether introduces 6 new story missions of paid DLC to Minecraft Dungeons, all of which are set in the Nether. There will be familiar mobs from the vanilla Minecraft Nether, all set to feature, including ghasts, blazes, wither skeletons, and piglins. The terrain has been inspired by Nether update biomes and structures, but also by the Dungeons team's interpretation of the Nether and Piglin civilization. Along with this, a free update, so not something that you need to buy the DLC for, is going to introduce a feature called Ancient Hunts, procedurally generated endgame missions where players have a little more control over the parameters of the mission and can yield gilded gear. Gilded gear includes a new higher tier of enchantments which are unique to that category of equipment. You won't be able to get them on anything else that drops. A Piglen merchant is also going to be added to the camp, along with the opportunity to find gold ingots as a currency while exploring the existing levels. Since Piglins will trade in gold and not emeralds, this guy's going to give you some more exclusive gear you wouldn't be able to get from the regular village merchants. The team is also planning on rebalancing Apocalypse Plus difficulty to make it more appealing to long-term players, and more information on that should be coming soon.
So I watched the Dungeons Diaries about the Nether coming to Minecraft Dungeons, and I'm sure they were showing off some of like the later game stuff, or just could be because I haven't played past the first boss in Dungeons. But man, did it look fun, but overwhelming. Like
Yes.
There was a lot of fire.
A lot of fire and a lot of piglins shooting at you more or less constantly. And in some of the video footage, they had basically a bunch of piglin crossbowmen who were just like absolutely wailing on the player, who, to their credit, didn't seem bothered much by that. So hopefully they're a little bit less damaging than the pillager archers are. But yeah, it seems like there's a lot of very intense kind of areas of that. And as you might expect from the Nether, when you get swarmed by zombie pigmen, it's the same kind of experience. You're just vastly outnumbered right away. So maybe they're trying to go for that kind of vibe with the Dungeons DLC.
I mean, it looks fantastic. I the way that Dungeons handles graphics, and we've seen things like lava before, in Dungeons, and how cool it looks with like the heat wobble and how intense it looks, and the nicer graphics. And I just immediately felt it looks like Dungeons, but it looks like the Nether. Like it didn't feel tacked on. It felt like, what a cool way to do this. Like the seemingly kind of like, top down look with like, well, you can see where they've kind of had a relatively flat surface that has multiple different directions. But instead of being woods or mountains or things in your way, it's just sheer drop offs into lava or nether or, vast nether wastes and things like that. So even though you probably, in a lot of ways, and in a lot of the places that I saw in the trailer, not the trailer, the diary video, it looks like you can get knocked off into oblivion and die quite easily, which could be good, because if you're dealing with that many mobs, if you don't really care about all the drops you might get from piglins and stuff like that, pushing them off the edge might be a viable way of dealing with that many mobs. You get an arrow with pushback or something that explodes and sends 6 piglins flying over the edge, that just reduces your foes by half. You're like, sweet, I can handle that kind of stuff.
Having gone through the game weaponless and having used there's a wind horn artifact that pushes enemies back a few blocks, like throwing stuff into a pit like that, really satisfying, and looks way more possible in some of the areas of the Nether that we've seen already, because there's sort of a lot of netherrack bridges and things like that. I think they've done a really good job. Like, I can't imagine what this would have looked like had they not just had the Nether update landscape to pull from, because they would have had to take so much more creative liberty with the look of the Nether to create a bunch of different stages. But then with each of the biomes basically providing, well, you can have a Nether Wastes, a Soul Sand Valley, a Basalt Delta, like all of that can be individual missions in themselves, not to mention generated structures and stuff. They've got a lot more to play with now. And it really does seem like they've gone a little bit deeper into, like, from what they said in the dev diaries, into what they imagine piglins to have been doing in the Nether all this time. The idea that they have some civilization of their own beyond just milling around bastions like they do in vanilla. So I think there's going to be a little bit more depth of the lore here, whether that turns out to be canonical to all of Minecraft or if it's just Minecraft Dungeons, kind of remains to be seen.
I like the back and forth. I like the back and forth we're seeing with, like, you know, we've got Howling Peaks, and then we've got Caves and Cliffs, and then we've got the Nether update from last summer, and then we've got, what's it called? Fire and something?
Flames of the Nether, yeah.
Flames of the Nether. Yeah, like, I love how vanilla Minecraft and Minecraft Dungeons is, like, feeding off of one another. It's so cool.
They're sort of in conversation a little bit, and it will be interesting to see if the Minecraft Dungeons End DLC has any kind of influence on what the End update that will presumably be coming a few updates down the line in vanilla Minecraft will end up looking like. So that's something to keep tabs on as well. But as far as this goes, I mean, it's got 6 missions, which is twice the size of any of the last few DLCs that had like 2 story missions and a bonus mission. So that's pretty promising as far as, and it's not going to be, it's already part of the latest like season pass of DLC. So I don't know if it's going to cost the same as previous DLC or if it's going to be like ever so slightly more, but it seems like it's introducing a lot of content for people who are hungry for that sort of thing. Assuming that people buy into DLC right away, a new player stepping into Minecraft Dungeons is going to have about 30 levels to play at this point, and there's going to be more in the upcoming Ocean and End DLCs as well. So, you know, for people who thought that this game was lacking in content on its initial release when it was still priced like $20 or whatever it was, then if you go all in and pay closer to what you'd expect for a full price game, then you're going to get like a whole mess of levels by the time that this thing is done. So potentially a bit more content there for people who've been asking for that. And it seems like the way they're expanding Endgame with Ancient Hunts also seems like a smart idea. It's along the same lines of Apocalypse Plus, but what it really does is, from what we can tell, generate a procedural level that's not necessarily any of the terrain that you've already seen. So for people who are just bored of running the same levels over and over, this might actually be a good antidote to the repetition of that, is having a level that you've never seen before and will possibly never see again, and just has a completely different landscape to anything else. I like the idea of this, and if it can give the player a bit more equipment to play around with and change up the weapon styles a little bit, it's going to be all the better.
Did anything visually stick out to you? Because I love the way that the warped and crimson forests look in Dungeons.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a few just bits of set dressing and plant life and stuff that they've put into the Crimson Forest in particular that looks like recognizably like vanilla Minecraft, but just taken to the next logical step, really. Mm-hmm. And they've done a great job. They've done a great job throughout the entire art design of Minecraft Dungeons to have transitions between blocks more than we get in vanilla, right? So you'll have, like in the Desert Temple level, for example, you'll have sort of stone bricks, tiles inset into the floor, and then you'll have one that's like a little bit covered in sand and then mostly covered in sand, and there are these sort of transitions as though like with a mossy cobblestone block getting mossier and mossier until it becomes moss, almost. And they've done the same thing with the Nether update version. They've done a netherrack block that's like partly covered in nylium, like it's mid-transition. And I think blending in stuff like that into the terrain makes the whole thing feel a little bit more believable and allows you to transition from area to area much more smoothly. So I think the visual style of it all looks really good.
I was also noting the size of some of the piglins. The brutes look big, and I know that the armored pillagers from my run through were big, but I think these look bigger. It might be just because their heads are bigger in like a different shape than villagers. Villagers have like that long narrow head, whereas Piglins have like a football sort of
Yeah.
shape to them, and it looked more intimidating than Piglen brutes that I've seen in game, like in vanilla.
Yeah, having them be a little bit larger. The axes are more detailed as well, rather than just being like a standard pixel art gold axe. They've actually got a bit more heft to them, and they look kind of a little bit, more interestingly designed. They've got gold helmets on as well, and I think one of the boasts about Piglin brutes when they were added to vanilla was that they don't need to wear armor because they're just so tanky. And I think in this case, you just needed that to have them stand out and make them look like we are the kings of the Piglins, with the gold hat on. So they've also added this Piglin merchant who I like this idea a lot. He's the sort of friendly Piglin you have at camp that you trade with. He sort of looks almost like shamanic. He kind of reminds me a bit of like Taurens from World of Warcraft, where they basically attack you with a tree trunk. And he's got this like this kind of heavy set Piglin with a big log across his back, and he's like a druid class almost. He's invented a potion that lets him like live in the overworld without zombifying. He basically just like drinks some sort of mushroom spore thing, and he doesn't turn into a zombie Piglin when he's in the overworld. And again, like little touches like that, little scrapes of lore here and there in this game are really helping it stand out from vanilla Minecraft by giving it a story but still allowing the player's imagination to take over in spots.
Do you remember the junk lady from Jim Henson's Labyrinth film?
Yes. Oh yeah.
That's the image that I get in my head. Obviously, it's more pleasant in Minecraft. Minecraft dungeons, but it's one of those things that that's immediately what I thought of, like the hunchback with like all of the things on your back,
the kind of droopy hair and stuff as well. Yeah, totally. It's very much that image.
Yeah, it's really, really bizarre. So with all the stuff going on in the screen, and this is my last point on this, this is kind of it's a newbie question because I haven't gotten this far in dungeons, but is there much spell casting in Minecraft dungeons later on? Because I have only ever used like swords and hand weapons and bows with artifacts that give me abilities, but I've not actually held a wand and like shot spells or fireballs or ice stuff forward. Does that happen in dungeons?
Well, it still happens through artifacts because like the game in general mostly supports this kind of melee ranged approach where you've always got a sword of some kind or some sort of melee weapon and some sort of ranged weapon, and the ranged weapons are pretty much exclusively bows. You get like crossbows and stuff as well, but you don't really get anything that changes from the archetype of a weapon you swing and a weapon you shoot. The wands and things like that really come into play in the form of artifacts, which, you get a lot more stuff like this after you leave default difficulty and you move on to the higher difficulty levels. But
okay.
There are swords and bows that help you gather souls as like a currency, and that's how you use stuff like the corrupted beacon, which you'll probably have got if you played through the game at least once. And then further into other difficulties, you'll get a greater variety of soul-based artifacts, and there are a few of those that were added in the DLCs as well. There's an ice wand that basically attacks the way the Iceologer does, dropping a boulder of ice on top of enemies and stunning them. There's a few things like that rely on souls as a kind of currency to use them as mana points, effectively. So it expands a little bit later, and it's something that we may see a bit of an expansion to in Flames of the Nether, but I think a lot of it is still going to rely on you walking up to stuff and hitting them to start with. You need to gather souls. You basically need to build up your mana points from 0 whenever you start each new level. So typically you have to do a bit of melee and ranged combat before you really get into the spellcasting side of things. You're sort of being encouraged to multi-class from the get-go, really.
Because it would be interesting if they ever add, rather than just new armor and new weapons, if they ever added a new weapon type. You know, like a wand that then would replace your bow. Like if you have a wand, you can't have a bow. You have to choose between the two. Mm-hmm. But then I don't know what they would do for arrows. Like, because currently your bow is managed by how many arrows you have. But wand obviously wouldn't shoot arrows. You'd have to have some other thing to then stack up in your inventory, like mana or like you said, maybe you first have to hit a bunch of stuff with swords before you then can unleash your ranged weapons power, whether it freezes people in place or sets fireballs or wind spell, I don't know, like whatever could be, used. And like you said, like, the horn that blows enemies back by so many blocks. Like that kind of stuff is currently attached to artifacts. And just the expansion of the game into various different biomes and now different dimensions has just got me thinking, like, what are they going to do for gameplay to then expand that, not just give you new places to walk around, you know?
Yeah. I think the problem right now is the reason that people aren't returning to this game a little bit more is that your class is so fluid. You can basically change equipment to change class at any time. So the game has to be more adaptable, and as such, you don't really get the more specialized weapons like having like a wand that has a different sort of projectiles to arrows, because you just pick up arrows as you go throughout the map. And I guess that would be simple enough to do if you just swapped the arrow sprite for something else, and then suddenly you were picking up, you know, like mana orbs or something instead. But I think the main point of it is it's the same sort of equipment you're getting throughout, and that might be what's maybe tiring some people out of it sooner than they've really given it credit for. I think the problem with the game now is that the only rewards they can really give to the player at this point is more equipment, which isn't going to appeal to everybody, just to have a wider range of things you can use. So we'll see, but Flames of the Nether looks fun. I'm looking forward to trying it out. I think it is due out, if not later in February, then in early March. I forget exactly what the release date said it was going to be.
Oh, wow.
No, February 24th, according to the Minecraft.net article. So we should be seeing that like basically next Wednesday, if not this coming Wednesday after the show, but basically the Wednesday after next week's show, we'll be stepping into the Nether in Minecraft Dungeons.
I got some work to do.
Absolutely. Right, let's move on to Chunk Mail. We got one short email to read here today. This one comes in from Tiki Man. If you would like to email the show, once again, we have a Chunk Mail dispenser episode coming up that we'd love to read some emails for. The email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. So Tiki Man writes on the subject of flaming arrows and flares. Hello, Joel and Jonny. I've been a fan of the show since your last interview with Azuma Void. I love what you do and wanted to say thank you. I just watched Azuma's video on the latest Snapshot, and I had an idea. I don't think Minecraft needs more new items and blocks. I would rather see the current blocks be used in better or in new ways. The new caves are very dark, and I was thinking that it would be nice if you could throw a torch down a cave, a ravine, or some other opening in the ground, kind of like how they do in the movies with glow sticks or flares. The torch could give some temporary light that would eventually burn out, similar to how flame arrows can cast a light like with Optifine. I know that's not a vanilla thing, but what if it was with a flare or a flare arrow? You could use a bow or a crossbow to shoot the flare and light up big caves. I don't think this should be permanent lighting, maybe something along the lines of a rocket. To craft flares, maybe a tiered set of crafting recipes could give flares different durations of light. I have no idea what the crafting recipe would be. I think it should be something accessible by late early or mid game. So the end of early game and into mid game. Maybe using items that you would find on your way to the caves, maybe even something to do with the new glow berries or the glow squid. Thanks, Tiki Man. So, yeah, dynamic lighting is the feature they're talking about in Optifine, and that does actually allow you to use anything that looks like it would produce light. So even in entity form, a torch or a flaming arrow is going to cast an aura of light around it, which it doesn't in vanilla Minecraft. And I think, historically speaking, I think the best explanation of this is because the developers don't want to mislead the player into thinking an area is lit up with block light that's going to prevent mob spawns, when actually it's just a temporary light that's going to disappear or not really affect the surroundings. So how do you feel about the idea of having flares or something that we can throw down into a ravine when we're spelunking?
It's one of the first things that I miss when I start a snapshot world or a play a survival thing where I don't have Optifine, is that if I have a flame bow and I'm exploring a cave, I generally like to see where the other side of the cave is, and I'll shoot a flame arrow and say, oh, that's where the other cave is, or this is what I'm walking into. Not necessarily to see everything. I just kind of want to get a gist of like what cavern I'm exploring. I miss it immediately. I'll do it and I'll shoot the flame arrow into the wall and go like, oh, that did nothing because I don't have Optifine because I'm so used to it. Steve S. actually wrote in with a very similar thought on the problematic of dark caves that we're going to talk about in just a minute, and projectile light sources, and how that would help deal with like these massive areas of pitch black that have a lot of mobs that have an easy access to you because of how the shape of the cave is.
Yeah.
And their comment was that running around and spamming torches didn't really feel fun. It just felt like you have to do this in order to deal with this cave, rather than exploring it naturally, you know? And so for me, I like the idea. I understand that there's probably one, a technical hurdle to do it in the game. Two, a rabbit hole that maybe Mojang Studios doesn't want to go down, which is to introduce entities giving off light. And to your point, three, that they don't want to confuse the player and make them think that this could be light that's going to prevent mobs from spawning. I do like the Minecrafty idea, though, of something more imaginative than even just a flare. Maybe we could sacrifice something like copper or glowberries to make something. I think that it's kind of basic, but like, what about like a flaming sticky arrow? Like something that needs like gunpowder, a slime ball, and a flame enchantment. And then like even makes a weird kind of like squishy stuck sound when it hits the wall, you know, kind of like a suction cup, you know, on the end of an arrow. I feel like arrows, because the players know how they work, they have this, you know, they don't stick around, or correct me if I'm wrong. Do they stick around as long as an entity? Like if you shoot an arrow into a block and you drop an entity on the ground, I know the entity disappears in 5 minutes.
Arrow despawn timer is 1 minute, I believe.
Right. So having an arrow that eventually falls off the block, which I know people have used in like Redstone and games for different timing things. Like if that was to emit light, if it was a arrow specifically made, you know, for that, not just any arrow, you have to make it. I think that might communicate to the player like this is for lighting stuff up, you know, temporarily, because as with all arrows, it eventually falls off the block and disappears. You know, like eventually the flame goes out. It could be silly and fun. It could have a really cool noise to it. You know, like just I'm thinking about something that sizzles, like, you know, anytime in Jurassic Park where they light up a flare and it has that kind of that whoosh noise, you know, and phosphorus is shooting everywhere. You could do some really cool stuff, I think. I don't know whether it's something on their radar, but I like the idea. And having watched your video, the Snapshot video, and how dark the caves were, I think it might be something worth considering.
Yeah, I do think we need to do something about the way players can light up a space like this to avoid torch spam just having to be a thing. And it's going to be so much more prevalent in cave bases than it is on the surface now, because the surface is at least light for half of the day. And that's not going to be the case at all in caves. And if you want to explore caves and set up a more permanent base there, you're going to have a lot better of a time if you have an easy way to light stuff up. I think the real problem here is game balance, and being able to light something permanently from a distance potentially means that you can go into, say, a ravine, using an example that people are familiar with from vanilla if they haven't played the new Snapshot, and just fire at all of the stuff above you, and then that lights up everything so you don't need to worry about mobs at all. And then suddenly you've removed a lot of the challenge of going caving in a ravine to begin with. So I think it's really got to be either... I think what Tiki Man here was suggesting was a temporary light source and something like you say, like an arrow that despawns after a minute or something like that, that's going to allow you to rush through. But if you take your time, you spend a bit too long there, then potentially like you need to renew them. They're in limited supply. You have, you know, a harder time crafting stuff like that. They're not affected by infinity, so like tipped arrows, they go away. Maybe. I think some of that stuff is potentially there, but then that's also a block that disappears after a minute. In game terms, there's potentially other stuff you can do with that, but I don't know how I feel about something like that just disappearing after a while, and I don't know what the technical side of things is going to, what it implies for the rest of the game. I just think maybe there is a way of having not necessarily ranged lighting, but just having a better way of lighting up caves, as larger radius for a light source or something like that, because I think for the moment we are going to be hamstrung by the limited amount of light sources we have, and torch spamming everything is still one of the bigger problems in Minecraft in general, and light being tied to mob spawning is one of the biggest problems we have for the future of the game in general. So I think at some point there's going to have to be either a separation of that or a reworking of how light values affect mob spawning. But that's another discussion entirely, and I think one we've covered in depth elsewhere.
this is a last minute, don't have to talk about it in depth, but, and it could be too much of a make easy button, but we have copper spy glasses. What if there were like a way to make like night vision goggles? I know there's a night vision potion. Like I get that.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there was a late game thing to like, you have to deal with these dark caves first until you have the material to make this, and then this helps you see for like similar to how when you're underwater you still have bubbles. Even if you have gear that helps you breathe underwater, you still have a limit. And I'm wondering if there could be a way to do that where you have to, maybe you hold the torch in your hand, maybe it's a different kind of torch and it just lights up farther in front of you so that you can see, but it has like it will eventually go out. Similar to how you have a hunger bar that you have to manage, like maybe there could be some sort of light bar. I can't remember which game it was. I feel like there's a couple of different survival games I've heard of that your torches are not infinite like Minecraft. You have to continually fuel them. Was Pixark like that? Did you have to fuel?
Ark Survival Evolved is like that. Pixark is like that. You have to constantly feed hay or whatever into a torch to make sure it stays lit. And that can get a little bit tedious, especially for a game like Minecraft that doesn't necessarily rely on like mechanics like things decaying over time, food rotting, and that sort of stuff. It's much more a survival mechanic than it is a sandbox mechanic.
How do you feel about some spelunking, sir?
Absolutely. Like I'm 100% on board from what we've seen. I'm very, very enthusiastic about what they've done. What were your first impressions of all of this? Because I found out about the snapshot while I was doing something else, and so I wasn't really able to get first impressions like right then and there. But having taken a quick look through the changelog, I instantly wanted to see what they had done.
I did the same thing. Last week I was really busy, and so I read the changelog, and then on the weekend popped into the snapshot. And I did more flying around in creative, just kind of looking for stuff and looking for shapes. But I did watch your video about the survival experience, and that's why in our pre-show I was asking about like when would be a good point for me to start a new survival world to explore this way, because I think that people that want to check out this snapshot should start in survival. Like, I think the experience is much better because I felt way more informed. I enjoyed watching over your shoulder more than I enjoyed flying around. I mean, the stuff I saw was cool, don't get me wrong. But I just feel like it has a much bigger wow factor when you're worried about falling off an edge or running from mobs, or there's just not the same when you're flying around in spectator.
Yes,
It's also harder to discern the shapes of things from spectator, I find, until you actually fly into the space.
Yeah, 100%. I think the main problem people are encountering, and the thing that I feel like it doesn't have as much impact for people, is that before they do any exploration of these caves for the first time, they go into spectator mode and they like turn on a night vision effect. And I'm like, you're missing 90% of the experience here, because finding a cave for the first time, opening out like a tunnel into one of those enormous spaces, and then it being dark and there only being like points of light from glow lichen around the cave. Like, I get that that's not a very good format for YouTube because of YouTube compression not dealing well with darker areas of the video, but the amount of people I see just turning on night vision and going down in spectator mode and then going wow at just this spaghetti mess of tunnels, and then it starts to feel a little bit underwhelming because you're like, oh, well, there's just like more caves, I guess, and some of them are bigger. If you actually do any of that stuff in survival, it all feels like it has so much more meaning to me because you're having to struggle against the terrain, you know? And that's really what survival Minecraft is. So considering that most of us are going to be exploring this stuff in survival, it doesn't take much to dig down 64 blocks and realize that you're now below zero and you're still going. So I honestly recommend survival as a way to look into this snapshot for anybody who's still curious.
Yeah, that's my plan. I might wait until another update comes to terrain just to kind of see if they're rolling forward with, you know, you can move one snapshot to the next. I'm not looking to take the Citadel right now into a snapshot, but I'd be curious to at least, you know, go from snapshot to snapshot with a persistent world once they get there. That said, I did throw the Citadel seed number, I think, human error potential here, into my snapshot world that I decided to check out, and it was totally different. Like, it wasn't the Citadel with higher Y values and more expansive stuff. It was just a different seed. So again, I could have screwed up there, but that's interesting. I'm hoping that there's more coming down the line for that. I also am pretty tickled that our speculation about negative Y values turned out to be correct. I mean, I think that was a pretty easy prediction. I don't think we were, stretching by any means, but I think that it's really cool to see the world height being what it is. And to your point, I was not expecting it to be this much.
Yeah, like 384 blocks. So Y320 is the new upper build limit, and negative 64 is where you'll find bedrock. And I've seen a surprising amount of debate about where Y0 should be now, because a lot of people arguing that Y0 should now be sea level, and that the world should sort of be adjusted just in terms of like the numerical stuff, so that anywhere you go below sea level is in negative Y, so that's just underground. And then to some people it feels weird that Y0 is still the bottom of the old world, and then you get negative numbers for only 64 blocks. Some people are arguing that Y0 should just be the bottom of the world as it now exists. So the 0 coordinate should be moved down to where 64 is, and the world height should be 384Y is like where it tops out. And there's so many different interesting justifications for each of these. I still think it's really nice having things the way they are, so we kind of know what to expect until you get to Y0, and then digging down into the new stuff when you get into negative feels more exciting to me right now. And that sort of feels like we are going further than we ever have before. And whether that changes for when people have gotten used to the new terrain generation being in snapshots, I don't know. But I sort of feel like the point is moot either way, and we're still getting the same amount of world. People are focusing on the semantics of it instead of looking at the bigger picture.
While I can see your point to the excitement of going below 0, I think one thing that is nice about that is the consistency with both X and Z coordinates having positive and negative numbers.
Yeah.
And now that Y also has positive and negative numbers, the only thing I could say is that if they were to do that and keep the negative, I'd be on board with them maybe raising Y like 1 to sea level.
Yeah.
And then having 128 down and then whatever that is left up. I'm not doing the math right now. But like, enough going up higher that you have a positive number as well. The difference between Y and the other directions obviously being that Y is going to have limits, versus you could just go forever in the other directions. I can also see the logistics of just taking Y0 all the way down to bedrock and saying like, it's just 384, start at bedrock and you go up. Mm-hmm. That's really straightforward. It's something that I find really, or I shouldn't say find, I found very confusing about Minecraft when I first started playing, is that the positive and negative X and Z coordinates are the opposite of algebra. Like it's not, it's the, like if you think about algebra in terms of your math grid, and then you think about a compass, south is positive in Minecraft and north is negative, which is weird to me. Like I would think I think the other way around. Like when I think of the I think it's the Z axis that goes north south, I think positive, I go north, I go up, because you're thinking about like, and that could just be a North American, like left to right, up to down sort of way of reading, sort of thing. And so yeah, like I can see the both sides of that coin. And I think, and I don't remember who wrote this in, so I apologize that I forget your name, but somebody was talking about introducing a relative or a younger cousin or something to Minecraft, and how they don't necessarily appreciate the oceans because they've never known anything else, right?
Yeah.
They've just always had this stuff. And I kind of wonder where everyone that's been playing this game for 10 plus years is just like, this is so weird. There's so many different ways they should do this. And then people that are going to come in after the Caves and Cliffs update, it's just going to be normal. Like that's just how it is, right? So I don't know if it's going to be any kind of thing that sticks around long term in terms of like how they number things. But it is interesting. And I think part of the excitement of going into the negative integers, because we don't know where the deep dark is going to go, I feel like it kind of has that nether or end, or like when you go into a negative vertical, you're just like, what do you mean I'm negative vertical? Like just like I'm below. Like, so it feels it's more exciting.
We've entered the upside down at that point. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And
How many
it's
people are going to do that?
I mean, right? And it still remains to be seen how they're going to implement the Deep Dark. And this is one of the things I'm interested in for the future, is where does that now fit among these giant caves that we've already seen? Like, the name still suggests it should still be underneath everything we could currently explore. And so I'm not certain if a certain amount of, like, the floor of the current caves is going to be, like, split off into Deep Dark biomes, if it's going to be a more open area. What we saw in Minecraft Live was still fairly enclosed. It was like a tunnel of sorts that the warden was effectively trapping you in. So I do wonder how much of that we're going to see, and the potential little structures and stuff dotted around, maybe tacking on to some abandoned mine shafts or something, could be interesting to see. There's some really fun world generation stuff that started to happen with older features, and we'll talk about some of the newer stuff in a second, but I think the older stuff like abandoned mine shafts, now that they've started to program these in so that they appear in these larger caves and just kind of have chasm-spanning bridges with oak wood supports and stuff, they take on a bit of a different character when they're that low down and they're not just networks of tunnels. Once they get into one of those larger spaces that opens out a lot, it's kind of cool to see them. And I've seen several that intersect geodes now, which is something I didn't see in any of the other snapshots that I was playing around in once geodes were introduced. And some of them like come through geodes and out the other side. Some of them effectively carve out the side of a geode, so you've got almost like a cross section in an abandoned mine shaft. And some of the screenshots I've got of these have just been really fun. So I'm interested to see where they go with that. And honestly, geodes themselves, now that you have these large caverns, geodes are A, easier to find, and B, they look sort of out of place to me, because I find a lot of them just kind of hanging down like eggs from the ceiling of a cave, and they're still fully formed geodes. You know, they've still got the entire, like, mostly encased in tuff and calcite structure of them, and that feels unnatural to me because of how intentionally rounded they look. So I sort of wonder if maybe they're going to see geodes being better integrated into cave terrain, and just like 1/4 of a geode sticking out of a cave wall or a ceiling, as though the rest has been eroded away by whatever else has generated the cave. But to me, having them still generate as these eggs of amethysts feels a little bit unnatural at this point.
I feel like it might be, and this is speculation because I don't know a lot about the underside of Minecraft, but it feels like it's an order in which things are generated. Like, did geodes come first, or did they come second after the giant cheese caves?
Yeah.
And if they switch the order, does then, when a geode encounters an open space, instead of saying make geode, say stop making geode and introduce air blocks, so that instead of looking at a convex bulb on the side of a cave, you'd end up with you'd end up with a concave, almost like a dish, so like it looks like the geode had been cut in half, exposing the inside, which would be a really cool find as you're lighting up a cave to look over and like, oh wow, half that wall is purple, because a geode has been cut in half, similar to how the mine shafts are going through the geodes. To your point about mine shafts, abandoned mine shafts, I think they look more natural. Like, yeah. I think rather than just stumbling upon this abandoned mine shaft, it's like, well, no wonder it's abandoned. There's no entrance.
There's no way in, no way out. Yeah,
exactly. Whereas when you stumble upon these giant caves and you think, oh, there's a single huge tall, platform suspended out in the middle of this. Obviously, that's where, the entrance was at one time, in the past. And it just kind of it gives it more history. And it feels like start your adventure here, and then you go from there. And I like it. I think it looks really, really cool. I'm hoping to see the integration of abandoned mine shafts into other things. Like how cool will those abandoned mine shaft platforms look coming out of like a lush cave?
Yeah. That's really what we're waiting for at this point, is the overlay of all of the additional biomes. But I just want to see what they look like scaled up to the scale of some of these caverns, because some of the caverns you find are just awe-inspiringly large. And I think the thing they've really nailed with this update is variety in caving, which was something we could never really rely on before. You would obviously get some tunnels intersecting, but largely speaking, the caves were going to be the same until you reached a ravine or you got a little bit closer down to diamond level and lava lake level, and then you maybe found some slightly wider caves around there. But most of the cave generation in vanilla Minecraft up until this point has been fairly predictable. And I think unpredictable is really what we start to see with these caverns. The Swiss cheese type of generation that they've been talking about has, more hole than cheese, really. But what you end up with is these enormous pillars of rocks supporting the ceiling, which feels like a very natural generation for that cave. And there are vast expanses now, that some of which are lit by glow lichen. I expect some of them will eventually be lit by lava lakes and stuff as well when they add those back in. And the scale of those feels very inspiring. I think it's also going to be very easy to get lost. But we have plenty of navigation tools in the overworld compared to somewhere like the Nether, which we're used to getting lost in anyway. So, people will keep coordinates and they'll keep everything else and they'll be okay. But I think they're a really nice template to add basically whatever we want to, either as the players or the developers, for lush caves and dripstone caves and stuff to be added in here, and then the players to be able to come in and build whatever they want in these massive expanses without worrying about being 2 blocks below the surface. I think is going to be a completely different experience now.
I really love the expansive caves. I remember I watched the Eximovoid video, as I often do for Snapshots, and granted he did the whole night vision thing. While he was talking, he was flying around effortlessly with Elytra in some giant caves.
Yeah.
And part of me is just it's cool, the pat on the back grind tip of the hat that you give to players that make that stuff, that have to dig out all that stuff. And there are some players that very much enjoy that. I am not one of them. And I like the end result, but it's just too much of a time sink for me. But now that they can get you most of the way there and inspire you by the different shapes and stuff that exist in these cheese caves, I had lots of ideas watching, some videos and just flying around them on my own little exploration. And what I really like about the pillars that you're talking about, these natural stone pillars, is how thick they are. We've seen a fair amount of images from the dripstone caves and things in the past, and they've been okay. But I think that in our minds, we're just thinking about how big these caves were from the Minecraft Live videos. But now seeing pillars that are 6x6 or 9x9 at the thinnest point, with a lot of texture and noise happening so they look more natural, really adds to, I think, the structure of Minecraft, where, you are playing a game where you can kind of build out infinitely with stone blocks in a single wide bridge, and just gravity doesn't do anything, right? And I think that this helps the caves feel more like natural caves by a long shot compared to just a giant hole in your Minecraft world, right?
But it also doesn't feel like you're looking at a set piece cave either.
No.
That's the cleverest part of this for me, is how organic everything feels, because we're used to, say, going into an abandoned mineshaft, you encounter that one room that's like a 10 by 10 cube, basically. The same way you go traveling in caves, and sometimes you'll encounter a cave junction that is just a completely rounded room, and you think, oh, it's one of those because you've seen them before. And now when we go out into these caverns, we're seeing something completely different every time, more or less. I still think there are some things like the underground aquifers, these sort of localized water levels, that still feel a little bit formulaic to me, but they're formulaic in a way that's still new to me, so I'm still excited to find them. There's going to be a little bit more stuff to discuss with those as they start to refine some of the stuff about that. But you're right that having a combination of thinner and thicker pillars really starts to flesh out the feeling of a natural cave. And I think part of the problem for me right now is that we only get them below Y0. And I think that's probably a concession to the fact that they won't be able to affect those chunks above Y0 in existing worlds. So naturally, they want to put the majority of the new cave generation underneath where bedrock level is for us now. So for people moving on to a new world, which you'll eventually be able to do, you'll be able to upgrade your 116 world to 117. I think they've wanted to put most of the terrain generation down there so we don't miss out on any of it. But I really feel like there should be a greater variety of it closer to the surface in new worlds, which may potentially be where those waterlogged aquifers that we were talking about, the ones that from sea level down to Y32 they're flooded and that's going to be fixed, that might actually be what's missing for me about the whole picture of generation at this point.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of the overworld generation, specifically in your video, did feel odd. Like to have this weird angled chasm go through a lake, and your only way down is to swim down, or find another way to dig down, I guess. That didn't feel quite as natural as far as the surface level was concerned. Whereas once we were down into the caves, that felt like a little bit more like where they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
I don't mind that they're so deep. I think maybe that's just where this is just the tip of the iceberg. I feel like things like seeing more lush caves appear closer to the surface might make more sense at first, especially if they entice the player to then travel down the spaghetti cave that leads to the giant cheese cave or whatever. I think that could be a nice way to progress. I also wonder too, like if you're going to dig down that far to get to these caves, that means you're going to encounter coal and iron and exposed minerals, and might be just naturally better prepared just because of the amount of stuff you're going to have to get through before you get to the big cave, because they are so dark and full of mobs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we should talk a little bit about where you're going to find ores, because I think right now ore distribution, they've acknowledged, does need tweaking in the light of these new caves, because these big caves leave a lot of surface level ores exposed. It's effectively like having a beacon strip mine already made for you. There's such a large space that inevitably, the way ore generation currently works, you're going to find diamonds and iron and redstone exposed on every surface, and they're still generating with the old terrain generation, which means anything Y16 and below is going to have diamonds, and that includes all of the new stuff. So I spent a couple of hours on stream running around one of these caves, and I think I probably spent maybe a full hour just exploring the cave alone, and I had nearly 2 stacks of diamonds and full diamond gear.
Wow.
So if you just run around one of these caves, that's not even with fortune either. That's just like raw diamonds out of the ground. So I think some of the rarer ores, if they aren't changing the actual coordinates at which they're distributed, then they might need a similar approach to ancient debris, where they at least have to be completely surrounded by other blocks. So you're only going to find diamonds if you start to dig into some of the walls, or you naturally expose them, instead of just having a free-for-all where you run through a cavern and instantly know where all the diamonds are. And
or give diamonds a floor, like they between Y11 and Y-11, and they just don't they don't appear lower than that. Something like that would work.
I took a poll about this on my YouTube channel recently because I was curious about what everyone's thoughts were after that video, and a lot of people wanted to see diamonds between Y16 and the bottom of the world now. They actually wanted a broader range to see diamonds in. I think probably because people just want to get hold of diamonds, right? Loosely speaking, they're like, yes, I can now buy out my entire server's economy. Inflation, guys. Everyone's going to have the same amount of diamonds, really. But I think the difference being, like, do we just have one stripe of diamonds there? Is there going to be striation of diamond ore and then nothing below that? At which point, what is the point for players who are more obsessed with material wealth in going below that at all? I think we're going to find that whatever the diamond distribution is, there is some play style that doesn't match up to it, so it's a really difficult balancing act for me. And I would definitely argue that shifting diamond level down to the new bottom of the world, down to like Y-48 through 64, is not really the best approach, because a lot of players are going to want to have diamond armor before they would feel confident exploring such large caves. Mm-hmm. And I think the devil's advocate argument is that diamonds or diamond equipment can very easily be found in, shipwrecks. You can get stuff through villager trades. You can even go to the Nether from the surface and then find diamond armor in a bastion or diamonds in a Nether fortress chest or something like that if you're lucky enough to find either. So the risk-reward balance needs a little bit of thinking through, and I'm certain that they're going to be doing a lot of testing of that over the next little while to find out what the right sort of balance is. You could have Y16 to -16, and so there's like a certain stripe of diamonds you could get. You could have a broader range and just make diamonds rarer so that you can encounter diamonds still by strip mining or branch mining, but it's going to be a slimmer chance than it used to be. And then if you wander down through into the caves, then you're going to find more diamonds exposed there, but at the risk of there being lots of mobs around and having to light the entire place up. There's a lot of thought that has to go into that, I feel.
Yeah, I don't mind so much that the caves are dark and dangerous. I was disappointed that they were so dark just because I wanted to see them.
Yeah.
But I don't mind that it makes Minecraft a bit harder to explore down there. Like that, because I feel like a lot of times, even as a survival player, I find sometimes the threats in Minecraft, being a late game player for 3 years, is just like, meh, it doesn't really... I die more from falling off of stuff when I'm building than I do from a mob killing me.
Yeah.
So I don't mind the idea of a new threat. Like, I think that's actually quite cool. Like I said, or like you said, I don't know how they handle the progression there, but I know from my experience playing all of Fabric 3, the mod pack, they had a quarry, or I can't remember the exact name of the biome, but essentially it was a big like dip in the overworld with more than the average number of exposed minerals. Now, it wasn't diamonds. The game had, or the mod pack had things like, sapphire and copper and iron and a bunch of different things, coal that you can collect. But it was exciting as a player on the mod pack to be able to go to this one spot, take the extra travel distance to get there, but then while you're there, you really could pack away a lot of material. Mm-hmm. And I liked the excitement of that, and I kind of wonder whether I say no to diamonds for that kind of thing, but I'm still okay with seeing a lot of iron and a lot of coal, maybe some extra redstone in the walls of these caves, because I think that would kind of like enhance the excitement. Like you have to go down there, you have to battle the mobs, you can't see anything, you have to light the thing up before you can actually find them. But putting a torch down and then seeing like a wall of 6 or 8 redstone blocks just kind of like right there and exposed in the cave wall would be awesome. We also know that they're, at least with copper, they're looking at doing vein generation, right?
Yeah. So they've talked about adding more strategy to mining, is the way they've described it. And I think we might see the similar approach being taken now that we're looking at different cave generation. You might find one diamond ore in a wall somewhere, but is it just one, or is it like a longer stretch of diamond that you might have to dig 2 or 3 blocks into the wall to continue to find it? But you're going to be following veins of it more so than just finding blobs of it around the cave floor. So yeah, that might potentially be a worthwhile approach to take. And I would like to see a bit more like cave strata rather than like blobs of material when it comes to the decorative stone types as well. I think it'd be really nice to see veins of diorite and granite, or sort of generating in layers rather than just in patches. And I feel like that could once again add to a bit more realism for this stuff. Almost imagine it generating like the stripes of a mesa, but underground with some of those pillars dangling from the ceiling. And yeah, I really like that idea. So potentially we'll see a lot of stuff changing around about these.
In these expanses and the chunks getting much larger, the first thought that I had when seeing a giant cave that is dark, full of mobs ready to hand you your face, if you knew how to create some traps, like that could be a very easy early game mob spawner. If you just create a way to protect yourself from the onslaught of mobs, have them only spawn in the dark area of the cave where they can all walk towards you. If you're just playing in that area, you could probably amass a lot of bones, whatever the zombies are going to drop. You could have them all not die immediately, but like fall into a little catchment chamber where you could just run around and smack their feet and get the drops yourself. Like there could be a lot of potential there to get some XP and stuff early on without, I don't want to say not a lot of effort. You still have to survive long enough to set up the mob farm. But because the things are so expansive and there's not a lot of little caves next door taking up mob spawns, I feel like there was an interesting, kind of like dynamic there of like, if you knew what you were doing, you might be able to really take advantage of these caves from a technical standpoint.
Yeah.
And the other question that I have, which I know I didn't look into very much, but I'm curious whether you did, was in terms of like mob farms that require like chunk loading and the idea of like previously we had to light up caves underneath witch farms, to make them more efficient. If you're building things in the sky or you're putting a mob farm up above the world, like is this change in world height now advantageous to the redstone farms, or do you think it's going to create more complication?
It's a problem for technical stuff, especially because you've got an additional 64 blocks of spawnable space below you if you're standing at sea level. So effectively, while you are lighting up areas 128 blocks horizontally, you now have to light up areas 128 blocks vertically as well for a witch farm. So if you're looking at folks like, the Psycrafters who'd make a perimeter for something like that, they're also having to, make a perimeter that now includes another 64 blocks of height. So you're looking at a lot more effort going into technical farms, and also reduced efficiency thanks to the fact that the game is still calculating spawns from the bottom of the world upwards. So imagine your Enderman farm suddenly being 64 extra blocks in the air, and you're not going to see nearly the spawn rates you see down at the bottom of the world. And obviously the end isn't changing, the nether isn't changing, so those farms won't be impacted. But if you look at witch farms as the example here, a witch farm is now going to be half as efficient as it was before, because the game is calculating spawns at 128 blocks above the bottom of the world instead of, where it was previously. So, yeah, there's potentially going to be some compromises to be made there. The thing is, with farms like that, with any kind of like natural mob spawning farm where you're taking advantage of not a spawner block, but the generation mechanics of mobs in dark rooms or whatever, the only thing that's really holding you back there is time. Like, once you've got the farm set up, you can just AFK there for twice as long. You'll get the same amount of drops. It's not like the drops themselves are being nerfed. It's that the efficiency of the farm is such that you need to double the amount of time you spend there, but you'll still get the same amount of things. And then it comes down to how much time you're willing to invest versus, the other ways of acquiring that stuff. We might see people trading with villagers more to get redstone instead of setting up a witch farm, but you can still AFK overnight at your witch farm and get a decent amount of drops from that. I don't think it's going to be a huge problem compared to the benefit it's going to have overall for the community when it comes to having fun exploring the caves. Sorry, go on.
Do you think that farms like the floating mob farm in the sky, the idea being that you get your AFK spot so high that you're not loading anything below because your player radius is basically hovering above the ground, now that you can get that even higher, even though they still calculate mob spawns from the bottom up, the fact that you're not loading in nearly as many caves and have to run around for stuff like that. So, I mean, witch farm, obviously you have to do it around the witch hut, but like if this is something that you build up in the sky, do you think that will be better for players now that they can basically build it farther away? It's the same reason that people make the gold farm donuts up above the nether.
Well, I mean, in theory, you don't need to build it any higher than you can already build it, because the only thing is you need to be 128 blocks away from any spawnable space. So if your sea level is still at Y64, then you still need to be at Y192, which is where people build them now. You still have, 256 blocks of height to build in the world, so we could build those higher. The point is, building them a little bit lower means that the spawn rates are going to be better. So I don't really see people shifting that around unless terrain shifts upwards somehow, and then it becomes advantageous that you've got a higher build height limit. The build height limit is really there because they want to make mountains more expansive and have mountains actually feel mountainous while still allowing players to build on them. So I think having mountains that now peak around the same level that we see shattered savanna biomes peaking, around like Y220 in some instances, that's going to still allow for, okay, you can build a 100-block thing on top of this before you hit build height. So you can build a big castle on top of the highest mountain you can find in the world, and you've still got enough room to do that. I think technical Minecrafters aren't really going to care that much about it because they're already building farms in places that are selected to be as high enough in the world that they don't encounter any mob spawns, but low enough that they're still taking advantage of, advantageous mob spawning algorithm.
I don't have a lot to say about the build height. I mean, it's cool. I'm looking forward to mountains. The part in your video where you showed it a shattered savanna and you basically said, like, imagine a mountain being up here. I was just like, yes, 100% on board. The only thing that has me concerned is, like, if you want to build something massive, like if you want to build the Tower of Orthanc and you want it to go floor to ceiling build height, if the render distance doesn't render in the ground, then it kind of defeats the purpose. Like, if I can't see the top of my tower from the ground, then it's going to be cool for mountains because the mountains are going to go up into the fog. But at the same time, like in real life, you can, unless it's a cloudy day, you can see the top of mountains, And so I'm wondering if there might be like a render fog change vertically for playing, because I wouldn't want to put all the time into something or plan to do something really tall only to find out that I couldn't see the top of it.
Yeah, and for some people that might be a good thing because, I put a pillar in a desert and then, filled it with stone blocks all the way to build height, and then from the ground, the top of that not rendering in because of the fog is actually almost impressive to me. It's like you can make something that almost looks infinitely tall because you can't see the top of it. So
right.
If you wanted to use that for impact, then you can find yourself building that high. But I honestly, I don't see that many people building up to Y256 anyway, and I would be surprised if this shift in build height really encourages that many other players to build bigger, except when it comes to creative builds, which, could have added in a couple of 100 blocks extra, but they just didn't have the room. So now they got 64 blocks more to build with there. But yeah, I don't see people doing that often in survival, which is, primarily what I play. Yeah, the build height thing doesn't matter as much to me as the depth, because the depth actually has content right now. And I mean, if potentially we end up seeing Sky Islands put above Y256 or something like that, then it would change something for me. But I don't know if that's really the direction they're going, especially not with this update. But who knows? More Sky Room in future potentially means more impressive terrain, or potentially some changes to terrain that we could see in future.
The thing that I thought of with build height and or atmospheric perspective, in terms of the fog distance and stuff like that, which would be very cool in tall builds, is not necessarily building something that tall, but being able to build a skyscraper, have that go up to whatever height you want, 128, 200, something. If you wanted to then add a helicopter or a plane or something, you could get yourself up to build height and put that up there. And if it would render in, but render in a, like, with enough atmospheric perspective in between it, it would be a really cool effect to be able to put things in the sky. Maybe it's a dragon, maybe it's a pterodactyl. I don't know what it is. But the fact that it could be so far away that the resolution would be fuzzy enough that you could give some real life to the sky in Minecraft would be very cool.
You can build clouds out of whatever you want now, because they're all just going to render in as like fluffy white things because of the fog. Yeah. So going back a little bit to the cave exploration stuff, and this is my last thought really before we wrap things up, because we're going long here. Of course we are, but this is such a big snapshot that I feel like it merits this amount of discussion. As far as night vision goes, and people are talking about how night vision is going to be so much more useful, I really feel like night vision needs revisiting and revising to brighten your surroundings, but to not remove darkness entirely. My main problem, and I think it's just a function of how it is easiest to code night vision, is that you just remove all darkness all the time, and like everything is lit up evenly. And I sort of feel like that means that the caves don't look as dramatic anymore, and is part of my problem with people flying around and just looking at these things in night vision in spectator mode, is that you lose some of the subtlety of the way everything has generated. And you were talking about night vision goggles and stuff earlier, and maybe that could be an alternative. But I think the night vision potion effect could really just brighten everything while allowing you to see where there are still dark spaces. Also eliminates the problem of running around a cave and not knowing where the dark spaces are and running into mobs because everything looks evenly lit to you. But I feel like people who are just going to be using night vision to explore these caves are missing out on how nice the experience can be and how much atmosphere is in these caves now, because all of the atmosphere right now is conveyed by lighting, and if you're removing the lighting, you're removing the atmosphere, to me. So I would really like to see maybe an update to that in future, if not in this update, that brings night vision a little bit closer to just amplifying the lightness a little bit, but not necessarily removing those dark areas. I also think, going back to the email, we do need a bigger lighting solution for bigger caves. And I don't want to make torches obsolete, but having the option to craft something with a wider lighting radius is very appealing in the face of such vast spaces. And once again, it comes down to the problem with detangling lighting from mob spawning a little bit, because by lighting an area up artificially but not having block light there, you're only solving half of the problem. Because the problem is not necessarily I need to see all of this. The problem is I need to see all of this and I need to stop things that kill me spawning there. And so I wonder if we will see any kind of movement towards either disentangling lighting from mob spawning or allowing us to have light sources with a larger radius to counterbalance how big some of these cave spaces are that people are going to want to build with. And that will have the knock-on effect of making the surface a little bit easier to build in too, and potentially eliminate some of the problems people have with having to have light sources every 5 blocks so that you can guarantee a certain light level for mob spawns. But,
yeah. I guess the easiest way to do that would be to just increase the base radius. So like instead of a torch having a radius of 15 and the light falling off 1 for every block, if the radius was 30, and the light didn't start falling off until after 15 blocks from the torch, then it would gradually get lower. I guess the issue that I have there, and I don't know how to solve it, is that like then all of your builds are just bright. Like everything just has to be like neon, like on all the time, and that's not what I would want. I'm not familiar enough with it. I've seen it used in some mod packs. It's like a mega torch.
Yeah.
And it does the same idea. Does it create light or does it just affect spawns?
I think it's more a spawn affecting thing. I've seen a lot of people place it underground as well because it affects like the chunks that it's in rather than it necessarily being something that has to cast block light everywhere. It's more of like a hard-coded, okay, stop mob spawns within this radius if one of these is present. Which again is different, and it removes the lighting aspect from mob spawning, which is very powerful to mess around with. And we've talked about this before about how if you give players that power, then they can mess with each other by blocking mob farms, or it just becomes too easy to limit where mobs can spawn if you get enough of these. But I think sooner or later something like that is gonna probably have to give one way or the other in the survival game. Otherwise, players are just going to be spamming torches around these caves for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I hear you. I feel like there could be, I don't know, I wonder, there has to be a more elegant solution. I just can't quite think of it. And I mean, and we can't be the only people. I'm sure the Minecraft devs have been racking their brain about how to handle this for a long time. And on that note, I want to tip my hat, because like, we've been listening to the news, we've been following the snapshots, but like to see it firsthand, to see both from a creative flying around and from your survival perspective in your video, like I am impressed, and I want to tip my hat to the developers, and just like this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like this is just them saying like this is where we're going, but it's by no means obviously finished, and like this is I think probably the biggest update I've ever seen in the game that I've been playing so far. Like Oceans were huge, but this is bigger.
This follows on the heels of the Nether update, and we're still impressed at the scale of all of this. And yeah, I honestly did not expect how much 64 extra blocks of depth was going to change things. And people have made mods that increase the world height exponentially, like the cubic chunks mod does that, where you can just go down into the world for as long as you want to. But somehow this being part of vanilla now, and being an official sort of update to the game is mind blowing. And yeah, once again, hats off to the devs for doing what they're doing right now, because I can't imagine the hoops they're having to jump through to make sure it performs well. And yeah, hopefully this is just the beginning. We're going to see even more refinements to it in the weeks to come. But for now, that is going to be it for this episode of the Spawn Chunks. Feel free to write into the show and share your opinions about what you think of these caves. I expect there's going to be a few controversial ones out there, but we will try and get a well-rounded look at that over the next couple of weeks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff we've talked about today at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, please consider putting some value back in by visiting patreon.com/thespawnchunks. You can join our community. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat, gets you listening to the extended version of the podcast, The Render Distance, and gets us closer to our next goals of having a monthly Minecraft audio hangout where we shoot the breeze about what our patrons have been doing in Minecraft that week. We're currently at 234 patrons, which is another increase from last week. Many thanks to everyone who has jumped on board. Hopefully you're listening into the show live right now. And special thanks go out to our content engineers, Fazu Battlecaster, General Pattern 82, Greener Canuck, Hunter 555, Jumbo Sale, and Yitz for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. It's free. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on Twitter and Instagram, but a personal recommendation is by far the best way to share the podcast. Poke a friend in the arm from a safe distance and say, hey, you should listen to The Spawn Chunks, and let them know where they can go to listen. Those places include iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube, really wherever you get a podcast. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on thespawnchunks.com, and the Patreon page is where you can find the Render Distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixel Riffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where I attempt to make sense of this crazy and wonderful game in a series called The Minecraft Survival Guide. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, doing behind-the-scenes work for the Survival Guide, and I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at Pixel Riffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything I'm doing online, including my illustration and design portfolio, is at joelduggan.com. You can listen to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast, all about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment, at thecitadelcafe.com. Ryan Murphy is going to be joining me this week. We're going to be talking about Destiny 2 because my first multiplayer experience in that game is happening tonight. You can follow me at Joel Duggan on social media and, of course, at Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I am building a medieval town in Minecraft.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and now we're back in the mine.